You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Hello, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7. WOKI, and as we approach the holiday season, it's natural to think about how we want to do our year-end planning. And I think there are several elements that come up with that. One is it's natural to think about giving, and not just presents under the tree, but the lasting legacy we want to leave for our loved ones, and potentially the causes we also care about. We want to think about year-end planning. What can we do to maximize efficiency both in 2024, 2025, and beyond? So if you have questions about creating legacy, creating sound financial planning here at the end of the year, you're in the right place today. We're going to talk about wealth transfer and estate planning. Do you need an estate plan? And what should that estate plan look like? We'll talk about healthcare planning. And protecting your estate from healthcare costs in retirement particularly. We'll talk about creating a sustainable withdrawal strategy for retirement. What should that look like? What should that not look like? And finally, we'll talk about tips that can improve your year-end financial health. So estate planning, do you need an estate plan? You know, if you own something and you love somebody, you need an estate plan. You know, estate planning is not just for the wealthy. It's for everyone who wants to ensure their wishes are carried out and their loved ones are protected. An estate plan also takes care of you while you're alive. What happens when you become incapacitated? Who's going to make your decisions for you? Who can pay your bills? All of those kinds of things. So let's just kind of dive into the principal components of what you need in an estate plan. First off, what are the basic elements everyone needs? Of course, I think everyone needs to have a will. If you don't have a will, then, you know, and you pass away, any real property you have, the state of Tennessee, if you live in Tennessee, will dictate who gets what. And it'll be a very convoluted process. You've also got to understand, what does the will cover and what does the will not cover? You know, beneficiary designations for things like IRAs and 401ks and even life insurance are critically important. It's understand, well, how does that work? If I have one person on my beneficiary designation for my IRA and my will says something else, what happens? And the answer is, it doesn't matter what's in the will. The beneficiary designation has full control and authority legally over who gets what. That's for your retirement accounts. You can set up beneficiaries on your other investment accounts. You can even do that at the bank with what's called a payable on death or a POD. When you do that, the will not govern those assets. But there's no way to get your assets to your kids without estate planning for real property. You cannot name a beneficiary on real property. So you need a will, you need to double check your beneficiary designations, connect all the dots. You need powers of attorney. There's a medical power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. These are the two documents that take care of you while you're alive. The financial power of attorney is for someone to pay your bills and administer your affairs when you cannot. And the medical power of attorney is for someone to make your medical decisions when you cannot. They're both very, very, very important. And then, of course, having an advanced medical directive, a living will. In the state of Tennessee and in most states in the country, you have a right to decide how you want to pass on if you're incapacitated and you have no hope for recovery. Now, if you have a properly designated medical power of attorney, your power of attorney can make those decisions. But having the advanced directive where you've put on paper what you would want to happen if you're incapacitated and have no hope for recovery, what that does is it removes the burden of the decision from your child's shoulders. You know, there's a big difference in your daughter saying, you know, don't give Dad a feeding tube, versus, you know what, Dad said on this form, he signed it, he doesn't want a feeding tube used to prolong his life, so let's just not use the feeding tube. There's a different weight that goes with that decision when she may and your daughter may know what you want, but she's still having to make that decision. So all of these are key parts of an estate plan. These have nothing to do with taxes. You know, a lot of times when we talk about estate planning, people naturally think, well, I don't have a big estate, I don't have to worry about that. And you know, right now you can pass, one individual, you can pass almost $14 million to the next generation without any kind of an estate tax. So, you know, when we look at estate planning, if you think about it as a pyramid, the tax piece is just right up at the very, very top of the estate planning pyramid. It's just the icing on the cake. Now, everybody does have a tax planning issue in their estate planning if you have a retirement account. You don't have an estate tax, but you do have income tax that has not been paid on that account that will have to be paid by somebody at your death. Whoever the beneficiary is going to be, they'll have to pay that tax when they pull that money out. So tax planning is important for pretty much everybody, regardless of the size of your estate, especially if you have retirement accounts. But all of these things are critically important. I think several things. One, start early with your planning. Again, if you own something and you love somebody, you need to have an estate plan. You could be, 25 years old, and if you own something and you love somebody, you need an estate plan. You should have flexibility in that estate plan. Many times I see people get kind of hung up on making decisions because they feel like it's concrete. Hey, once I make this decision, it's in concrete. I've made the decision. That's what's going to happen. And the reality is a good estate plan has flexibility, and you can change your estate plan at any time. I think it's important to communicate your plan with family members. For your family, your kids and grandkids to understand how things work and have an idea of what you're dealing with, they don't have to know everything about your assets. They don't have to know the amounts. They don't have to know how they're invested, for example. You can share that if you want, for sure, but they don't have to know all that. They just have to understand concepts of how things work, how are assets transferred, what controls what assets. If the anything the will governs is going to go through probate. Probate in Latin means prove the will. So it's important to understand the kids, what does that look like? And then I think it's important to have everything organized and in one place. If something happened to you unexpectedly, if you're the one that takes care of the finances in the family, where's your spouse or your kids? Where are they going to find everything? Have you thought about how your digital assets will be handled? That's becoming more and more important in today's world. Your digital presence online. What about your passwords? All of those things. How will people get into Facebook and your email, and how will they check out all that stuff? What if you coordinate a lot of your bill paying electronically? That's all part of your digital footprint, and all of that needs to be addressed. And then finally, I think that it's important to include charitable giving if you're charitably inclined. And there are a lot of benefits to that. We're going to talk about that more later in this show. But we want to be smart about how we give, not only in terms of who we give to and make maximum impact, but also in terms of minimizing income taxes. If we minimize income taxes by the way that we give, then we can either give more or give the same amount and we have more. So we want to be smart. It's not always great to write a check to a charity. If you can give money to a charity out of your IRA if you're over 70 and a half years old, and it's not a taxable distribution. You're giving a taxable asset that you've never paid the tax on. You're giving that to charity, which does not have to pay the tax, and you don't have to pay the tax. If you donate an appreciated stock You don't have to pay the tax on the gain, and you get the charitable deduction. You get a double whammy. If you set up a donor-advised fund, about roughly 90% of Americans now do not itemize deductions. Because, back with the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the deduction went way up. And I do think it's very, very likely that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to be extended in the new Congress in 2025. And probably be extended through 2034. So if you're not itemizing, making a big donation to a donor-advised fund, you get the donation now. It's like a little mini charity that you can control the investment. So you make the donation now, the money's invested, you get the charitable contribution, and then later on over the coming years, you can donate to the charity of your choice or the church, as long as qualified charity. You can donate it and have it distributed tax-free to those charities at that time. So by bunching your donations into 1 year through the use of a donor-advised fund, you can potentially itemize that year. Now then that also brings in your year-end planning with how you do things like bunching your deductions. How do you pay property taxes? They're due March 1st, but you can pay them now before the end of the year. But you could wait, pay them in February, and then for the following year, you could pay them in November or December. And you bunch them into 1 year, and potentially that helps you be able to itemize and get more bang for your buck. So minimizing those taxes is important as well. But when it comes to general misconceptions about estate planning, I think one is, you don't need a big estate to have an estate plan, would be one. You should be reviewing your estate plan. How often should you do that? I would say about every 5 years. Now, so I know some attorneys that say every 3 years, and I'm not an attorney. I think every 5 years you ought to get your documents out and read them and review them. Maybe check in with your attorney and see, have there been any legal changes that I need to be aware of? And with you reading through it, you may identify some things that you want to change. The other thing, though, is you need to review it if you have a major life event in your family. Now, what is a major life event? That would be a marriage or a divorce, a birth or a death. That should trigger a review of your estate plan. All right? And then, as I say, I think it's important to communicate your wishes to your children. And then finally, I do want to just mention again the balance between leaving money to just family or both family and charitable causes. If it may be you don't feel like you can give a lot right now because you want to be careful you don't run out of money, but you want to give some of your estate at death, and there's smart ways to do that. When it comes to charitable planning at death, you really should start with your retirement accounts. Because, if I have $1,000 in my IRA, it's not worth $1,000 to my kids because they have to pay income tax on that money. But the $1,000 that's in my bank or in my investment account, it is worth $1,000 to them. So if I'm going to leave $1,000 to church or charity at my death, I'd rather leave it with my IRA asset. I'm being more tax efficient with what my kids get, and I make more impact with the church or the charity. So all of these things are critically important with estate planning. Again, do you need one estate plan? If you own something and you love somebody, you need an estate plan. Now we're going to get to our first break. When we come back, we'll talk about how to protect both your health and your wealth with proper health care planning in retirement. So stay with us. You're listening to More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thank you for tuning in to More Living, right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan, and it's the end of the year. We're celebrating Christmas. We're getting presents, thinking about giving. We need to think about how do we close out the year financially? How do we give? How do we maximize the impact of our gifts? How can we maximize the effectiveness of our financial plan? In this segment, I want to talk about healthcare costs. They can be one of the biggest expenses in retirement, and often it's the unexpected medical expenses that can really drain retirement savings the fastest. So let's explore how to prepare for both anticipated and surprise healthcare costs, ensuring your retirement savings stays intact while protecting your health and well-being. So what are some key unexpected medical expenses? One can be prescription drug costs for serious conditions. And will certain drugs even be covered? Medicare Part B and Part D, which is your drug coverage, oftentimes, you may have a drug that's critically important and it's not covered. Now then that also comes into your Medicare supplement if you get a supplement plan or a Medicare Advantage plan. But it's very, very important to understand how prescription drug costs, what are your prescription drugs as you start to approach, and if you're still working, and you're getting close to 65 and you're getting close to retirement, and you're going to be looking at Medicare, that's something you really need to be looking into. Certainly out-of-network care and emergency services. Got to be very careful with network care, and that drives a lot of our decisions of who we enroll in for our supplemental coverage with Medicare. Are my doctors going to be covered? Certainly long-term care costs. Those are not covered by Medicare. And, I say that. You can have a situation where up to 100 days is going to be covered at some level by Medicare. There are some rules for that. You have to follow a hospital stay. It has to be skilled care. But that's, even if it is covered or mostly covered, that's 100 days. Long-term care by definition is if you need more than 90 days. So we're talking about, there are some people going to need long-term care. They can't live on their own for a limited period of time, 4 to 6 months. They need rehabilitation. Whether it's being able to move, whether it's movement related or being able to swallow or whatever it is, they get rehabilitation, and then after 4 to 6 months they can go back home. If we eliminate those people, the average long-term care stay is about 4 years in the United States. And if we look at dementia specifically, the average is closer to 8 years. So planning for long-term care costs with an average stay annually of $108,000 a year is also important. How would you pay for that? Certainly, how do you pay for your deductibles and your out-of-pocket maximums? And when you look at Medicare supplements to supplement Part B, how rich of a plan do you go with? If you go with a richer plan, you're going to pay more in premium, but then your utilization costs are going to be very, very low. So you'll have more of a fixed cost. You'll know what you're dealing with. If you go with a less rich plan, your premium's going to be less, but you're going to pay more for utilization. So you got potential to not pay as much, but you also have a little bit more of an unknown. So again, it's important to balance all this when you're examining things like your Medicare and supplement plans. Certainly new or sudden healthcare conditions also comes up when we think about the richness of our Medicare supplement plan and also our prescription drug plan. And then we have to realize that healthcare costs rise at about double the rate of inflation. So, if inflation today is at 2.5%, medical costs are going up at about a 5% clip. When inflation was at 8.5% that year, a couple of years ago, yes, medical costs went up at about a 16 to 17% clip. And then, how can you prepare for these things? I think maximizing a health savings account, if you are eligible for a health savings account, if you have an HSA eligible plan, you get a triple tax advantage. It is the single best tax advantage place to put money that we have in our Internal Revenue Code. You get a tax deductible contribution, you get tax deferred growth, and then tax-free distributions when they're used for health expense. It's like combining the advantage of a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA all in one, where you get a deduction up front and you get tax-free coming out. But you do have to understand, what can you use HSA dollars for? You can use HSA dollars to help pay for Medicare. But what if you're having your Medicare premium deducted from your Social Security? There can be some challenges there. So you just need to think about all that stuff. You should definitely include health care in your retirement budget planning. How much is health care going to cost? Now, we see things like the average retiree is going to spend $330,000 to $340,000 on their health care. Now, when we see a number like that, that includes your Medicare premiums. Okay, that's all in. That's premiums, that's utilization, deductibles, co-insurance, that's everything. And we think, holy cow, how am I going to pay for that? Well, we don't pay $320,000, $330,000 all at once, right? And again, if we get a rich Medicare plan, Medicare supplement, our utilization costs are going to be pretty low potentially. So how do we budget for it? And it should be budgeted for in your income plan. Now I can give you some rough figures. You know, if you're 65 years old and you're in relatively good health, meaning, you know, you're maybe on a few prescription drugs, maybe you've got high blood pressure, cholesterol, things like that, but you don't have a major condition. You probably need to have a budget of about $5,000 to $6,000 per year, all in for health care. I mean, these are rough estimates. Everything can be different. If you're a smoker, it would be higher, more than likely. You know, if you have a serious condition, it could be higher, certainly with some of these prescription drugs. But a good rule of thumb, $5,000 to $6,000 a year per person, all in, for both premiums, Medicare premiums, supplemental premiums, and utilization costs. So for a married couple, $10,000 to $12,000 a year. Well, that should be part of your income plan. Now at age 80, it's going to be about double that. So a married couple, you're going to be looking at about $20,000 a year for health care. So all this stuff's got to be planned for as part of your income plan. You need to account for inflation because, again, health care is going up at double the rate of inflation and has for quite some time. You need to investigate caregiving options and look at long-term care options. How would you pay, potentially, if you need long-term care, either in the home or in a facility? Now, I will say this. You know, the statistics now are if you're 65 years old, you've got about a 70% likelihood that you're going to need long-term care at some point. That means a married couple has right at about a 50% likelihood that you're both going to need long-term care. And again, very, very expensive. Now, if you're needing long-term care, though, let's say you're in a facility, you know, you're not going to be spending money on other things, especially discretionary kinds of things like you do now. So the bulk of your income can go towards that. You also would have investment income, right? I mean, when you're in retirement, investment income is going to be a key part of your retirement plan. And so that income you're not going to be needing that for other things if you're in a facility. So, you know, typically, how are you going to pay for the gaps? So, insurance can be a good option. Can you afford the insurance? And ideally, when we use insurance, what we're really wanting to do is take a small amount of money, set it aside. And I'm a big fan of these newer, I say newer, they've been around for a little while, but I call them asset-based plans, where you put up money aside. Let's say you put aside $125,000 or $150,000, and it's your money. But if you need long-term care, it leverages into say, instead of $150,000, maybe you get $400,000 to $500,000. So what you're trying to do is take one pot of money and leverage it into a much larger pot. Now, however, if you do that, as an example, that $150,000, you can't use that to produce income. And so not everybody can afford to do that. How are you going to, you're taking an asset that can no longer be an income producing asset. It's going to be your money, and it's going to go to your kids if you don't need it, or your spouse, but it's not going to produce income. So not everybody can afford to do that. And there are plans now. You don't have to set aside necessarily $150,000. You may do, you may pay, $15,000 a year for 12 or 13 years or something like that. But then again, can you pay that out of your income plan? So not everybody can afford to do that. So I think all of these things are critically important. Understanding when to enroll in Medicare as you approach 65 years old. If you're still working, does your employer require you to go on Medicare? Understanding those rules. If you don't go on Medicare when you're eligible and you're supposed to, then there are penalties that last for the rest of your life. You pay premiums to your Medicare premium permanently. So now, if you're working, for example, and then you're covered, and then you retire at age 68, that's a qualifying life event, and so you can come on Medicare. There's no penalty. But it's just so important to understand all these rules. Now, at Brogan Financial, we partner with, there's a couple of people that we use in the Knoxville community that their real specialty is health insurance and Medicare planning. And so we bring them in for our clients because that's all they do, is focus on, maybe it's a health insurance gap getting you from retirement age to age 65. How are you going to plan for that? If you're offered supplemental coverage through work even after you're retired, is it better to take that if you have to pay for it versus a Medicare supplement? There's professionals in the area that's what they do, and we have a few that we work with that we bring in for, if you need that help. But the most important thing is to understand we know healthcare costs can be one of the biggest threats to our retirement security. It's all about budgeting, planning. It's part of the income plan. It's about the relationship between how rich is your coverage versus, which provides a fixed cost, but more premium, versus a lower cost, but potentially more utilization costs, and understanding how all of those things fit into the equation. We're going to get to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, I'm going to talk about how can you create a sustainable withdrawal strategy for retirement. The 4% rule may be dangerous. We'll talk about that when we come back. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI. We're with you every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m., and again from 3 to 4 p.m. You can catch all of our podcasts on your favorite Spotify, Apple podcast. You can also get all of our podcasts online. If you go to broganfinancial.com and click on radio, you can listen right there and stream on the website. One of the most crucial decisions you'll make in retirement is how to turn your savings into sustainable income. We don't retire on assets. We retire on income. While the traditional 4% rule has been a guiding principle for many retirees, that's really come into question in the last 7 or 8 years with today's longer lifespans, changing market conditions, the challenge of bonds in a portfolio and how they create a drag on investment performance over the long haul. But perhaps there needs to be a more nuanced approach to retirement planning and income planning. So let's talk about different withdrawal strategies. Now, of course, first off, what is the 4% rule? And that is, however much money you have when you retire, you start off drawing 4% off of your retirement, off of your savings, and then you increase that every year for inflation. And then the idea is you'll have a sustainable income, you won't run out of money. But of course, no guarantees there. So if you had $1 million, you could draw $40,000 a year. I'm just using a round number. If you had $500,000, you could draw $20,000 a year. But it's really a lot more nuanced than that. First off, with people living longer and longer lives, 4% may not be as safe. Many are starting to recommend a lower percentage if you're just looking at how much can I withdraw. But then how does your Social Security strategy tie into all that? Are you getting a pension? Do you have a pension that's adjusted for cost of living, that has inflation protection? One of the biggest group of people in this area that still have pensions is people that work for Oak Ridge contractors. And as a rule, those do not have cost of living adjustments. So that means over time, to fight inflation, you're going to have to take more and more out of your life savings. And if you delay Social Security, you're going to need more initially from your savings, but then later on you're going to need less. And then, of course, there's the issue of market timing. When we enter a withdrawal phase and we're no longer saving and accumulating money and now we're actually withdrawing and spending it, the last thing we want to do is when there is a sharp downturn in the stock market, we have to sell off investments for income purposes. That's a way to absolutely kill your retirement plan and your wealth plan, is to have to realize and spend an investment loss. Markets are going to go down in the short term. They're going to go up in the short term. They're volatile. They're choppy. The disadvantage of investing and taking risk in the stock market is in the short term, you have no idea what you're going to get. So you shouldn't be living off those assets where you have to sell them. Now, if you have dividend yielding stocks, that's different. Because if they're yielding dividends, you can take the dividend for income and you're not selling shares of the stock. So if the share price drops, but they maintain their dividend or even increase their dividend, you're still getting that income, and then if and when that share price comes back, you still have that share price. You still have the same number of shares. But what you don't want to be doing is selling investments to take income, whether it's funds, stocks, whatever. So that's critically important is, I'm a big believer. There are different ways to structure income in retirement, but I'm a big believer in sequencing your money, meaning money I don't need right now I can take risk with. So, if you're 50 years old, that's easy because you're not retiring for 15 years. But if you're going to retire in 2 years, what if the stock market is sharply down in 2 years? Do you have some protected assets, some protected investments that won't be down if that happens? So, we have some money that's in a pot or a bucket, if you will, that can provide income 2 years from now that's not dependent on the stock market. Now, the reality is inflation is perhaps the number one enemy if you live a long retirement. And the problem with protected options like CDs, treasuries, bonds, they just over time have a very difficult time keeping up with inflation. The best way to fight inflation is to have some money that takes risk. But the problem with that is you just are completely unpredictable in the short term. So you can't depend on that money for income. So I'm a big believer in sequencing your money with a bucketed approach. But now there are other ways. You could separate, hey, what are my essential expenses versus my discretionary expenses? And you could structure things. Maybe you structure to provide, more stable guaranteed income. Maybe you use an annuity income guarantee to provide for the essential investments. And then discretionary investments are paid for with more of your at-risk holdings. So you match that guaranteed income to your essential expenses, and then you have variable income for discretionary spending. And then that means it does mean that if we go through a period of trials, 2 or 3 years with a difficult stock market, you have to slow down your spending. Now, what I don't love about that is I don't want the market to dictate how you spend your money and how you live your life in retirement. And frankly, in the early years of retirement, that's when you're going to want to do more discretionary spending, right? So, I don't want the market to dictate that. But some people do like that idea. They like the idea of securing their essentials and then paying for their discretionary desires, depending on how the markets are going. And then they can therefore maybe draw more than 4%. But then that means when markets are difficult, they have to cut back on their spending. As I mentioned, your Social Security strategy is a very, very big part of this. And more people are looking at the benefit and the wisdom of delaying their Social Security benefit because you're getting an 8% per year increase in that benefit. And with people living longer and longer lives, you need to be thinking about what things are going to cost in your late 80s. And your discretionary, you won't be spending as much on a discretionary basis, but your essentials will be increasing because of medical costs and things like that. And then, how do you structure to draw more income in that gap between retirement age and when you do draw Social Security? And then what's your RMD strategy for taking money out of your IRAs and 401ks? And how does tax planning fit into that? You typically have more control of your income taxes in retirement than at any other time in your life. And there's this sweet spot I like to talk about that's between retirement age and age 73. Now, why age 73? That's the year where you have to start taking mandatory distributions out of your retirement accounts, your IRAs, your 401ks, your 403bs, all retirement accounts except for Roth. You have to start taking distributions, and they're taxable. Well, from retirement age, when you retire, you no longer have earned income. Now, you've got to look at all your other income you will have and how's it taxed. But you don't have to take taxable distributions out of your retirement accounts until the year you turn 73. Or age 75 if you're born in 1960 or later. So you can really take advantage of today's low tax environment. Because who knows where we'll be 10 or 15 years from now with income taxes when we look at our federal debt and our deficit spending. But can you afford to do that kind of tax planning? It makes sense to say I'd rather pay a 12% income tax today on a Roth IRA conversion so I don't have to pay a 22 or 24% tax tomorrow. You're kind of buying the taxes while they're on sale. Because once you start taking minimum distributions at age 73, you won't be in a 12% bracket anymore. But you still have to pay that 12% tax cost. And it's still going to decrease your investment base. Some people cannot afford to do that in those early years of retirement. Because that is a hard cost that decreases your investment base. So I think all of these things are critically important to understand when you look at a withdrawal strategy. In my view, if you do a more sequenced approach where you bucket money based on when you're going to need it, and money in the short term is more protected, and then you can invest your risk money for longer terms of, I don't mean 20 years, I mean 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, that you can have some time to recover from the inevitable downturns in the market as long as you don't lose too much. I think most retirees, we can support a 3.5%, 4% withdrawal rate in year one, and that would go up over time. But again, there's those nuanced things. What about Medicare? What about Social Security decision if you delay? What about your RMDs? What about tax planning? So it really becomes much, much more complex. And in today's world, again, you need more of a nuanced approach. Now, when we come back, I'm going to talk about some year-end tips for good financial health to maximize your financial plan. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 to WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thank you for tuning in this week for More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Please check us out online, all the resources that we want to provide you with so that you can make informed and prudent decisions that can make a positive impact on the quality of your life. You can go to broganfinancial.com. If you click on resources, we have guides. You can follow us. We have our blogs that we publish on a weekly basis. You can actually sign up to get an electronic newsletter from us every week, and all that does is provide links to other content. It provides a link to our blog of the week. It'll provide a link to recent radio content. If I've been interviewed on, say, Bob Yarbrough or Halloran Hill or Phil Williams, it'll provide those links. So, and then we got all those guides and things like that. So do check us out, broganfinancial.com. Again, that's so that you can have great information to make wise decisions. Now, as we wrap up the year, we're often focused on certainly finishing projects, finding the perfect gift, most importantly, spending time with friends and family. And even though the end of the year can be busy with your to-do list, and you want to wrap up the year in the holiday season, I think you should make a little extra time to maximize your financial health and take advantage of any year-end opportunities. So let's talk about some year-end things you should be looking at. One, and I talked about it in the first segment, review your beneficiary designations. Make sure your retirement accounts, your other investment accounts, any life insurance policies that you have, make sure the beneficiary designations reflect your wishes. Make sure you have a copy of your most current beneficiary designation, and understanding that the will, if you have a beneficiary designation, the will is meaningless. All that matters is that beneficiary designation. So connect the dots. What does your will say? What do the beneficiary designations say? Do those make sense? Do they fit together into a comprehensive plan? Also, review your insurance policies. Have you experienced a major life event? Or are you approaching a new life stage? Are you getting married or have a grandchild or a child? Does it make sense to look at disability insurance if you're in your prime working years, or long-term care insurance solutions with some of those asset-based plans where it's still your money, but it can be leveraged into a much higher payout if you need long-term care? And can you afford to do that, as I mentioned in that segment? Maximizing your health care plans and the ability to use a health savings account if you're in an HSA eligible plan, because you get that triple tax benefit of tax deductible, tax deferred, and tax free coming out if it's for a qualified health expense. Are you eligible for a flexible spending account through your employer? Now, there's more rules with that. You put it in there, you need to spend it, or, in some of them you lose that money. So it's important to understand this, but you can have a tax advantage account to potentially reimburse for qualified medical expenses. But then you usually do have a deadline where you need to spend those funds. I think reviewing college savings plans. Should you look at a 529 plan for a child or a grandchild? Now, review your rates on any ongoing debt. What is your mortgage rate if you have a mortgage? If you have car debt, what are those rates? What are your credit cards? Typically in retirement, you don't want to have revolving credit debt. You want to be paying those things off in full every month. It's critically important to have no consumer debt when you retire. But whatever debt you do have, if you do have debt, what are those rates, and are there opportunities to maybe lower those rates? Contributing to retirement accounts. You can consider making your, in a 401k or 403b, you can go up to $23,000 in 2024, and it's tax deductible. If you are 50 years old or older in 2024, you can do $30,500 because you can do an extra $7,500. So maximizing those retirement accounts. And then even saying, hey, for 2025, it's going up another $500. So if you're 50 or older, it'd be $31,000. Can you increase your contribution to your 401k or 403b or company plan? Do you have an employer Roth option? And in a Roth 401k or Roth 403b, there is no income limitation. To add new money to my Roth IRA, there is an income limitation. If I make too much money, I cannot do that. But there is no such income limitation on adding money to a Roth 401k. So that's right. You can put $30,500 if you're 50 or older in a Roth 401k, and you get no tax deduction. You get no tax benefit today. But then later in life, that money will be tax-free in retirement if you have it for at least 5 years and you wait till after 59 and a half. Well, what a great opportunity for some earners. Tax-free money, and to be able to put that much money into Roth, and there's no income limitation. You may want to be considering an IRA rollover. Do you have an old 401k? There's an old saying, if you're not at your old company, why is your money? Now, you have to look at all that. What are the investment options? What are the expenses of that 401k? If you go into an IRA, what are those expenses? But typically, you have more choices when you're in an IRA plan. And then, of course, be considering things like your RMD planning. If you're 73 or older, have you started your RMD? There's a 25% penalty if you didn't take it by the end of the year. So you definitely want to make sure you're taking all of your RMDs. I've talked about Roth conversion strategy. You might want to consider paying a smaller tax rate today with a Roth conversion to pay a lower tax rate tomorrow. And reviewing your Social Security and Medicare elections. All of these things are critically important. So as we end the year and we celebrate Christmas, be thinking about, take a little bit of time to plan your year-end financial planning, and then structuring things not just for year-ending this year, but how do you want to move forward next year? Very, 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 very important. And then how do you want to maximize impact in your giving and in your legacy plan, which of course I talked about as well today. So today we've discussed wealth, because greater wealth provides for more living so you can live the best years of your life your way. I hope you have a very, very blessed weekend. Enjoy the holiday season. Remember, Christ is the reason for the season. So Merry Christmas to you. And have a great weekend. This is More Living with Jim Brogan, only on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.